This is part 2 of the Going All In with NeoVim screencast. The first part was a presentation, and I showed you kind of a global overview of what I'm going to talk about, the things I care about, and why I think NeoVim is better than Legacy Vim. And in this part, I'll actually do more of a live demo. Um, Please excuse my meandering. This is going to be something that's going to be kind of hard to edit. So I just decided to go edit in sort of, I have an agenda and I just going to have a stream of consciousness where I just talk about a bunch of different things. I might try some things and I might fail, and that's okay. So please bear with me as I try this out. This is all fairly new to me, but I hope it turns out great and I hope you enjoy it. The first thing I talked about is really the thing that allows you to go all in with NeoVim, which is the alias. So if I do alias Vim, you'll notice that my Vim is set to NVim, and that's what allows me to just do Vim and basically any command after that to just run NeoVim instead. So once you do that, you basically don't have to think about it anymore. What you see on the home screen of Vim, usually for you, you probably see um, the the new Vim kind of like home screen that shows you the version and everything. I'm running version 0.3.1 right now, which is the current stable release at the time of recording. And what you are seeing right now is a plugin called Startify. It just allows you to customize the startup screen and have a few shortcuts for the most recently used file and maybe a nice quote that randomly generates every time inside of a Kause. You can really customize it a little bit more, but this is kind of a basic thing from their GitHub repository. To make the transition into NeoVim a little easier, another thing that I recommend looking at is the age NVim from Vim. And that is basically a neat little, getting started guide of how to do the transition. I'm not going to go into how that's done. I just want you to, um, you know, do it at your own pace and adjust it to how you have your Vim set up, because you might have it set up differently. So this is that part. Um, I'm going to go over and look a little bit at my setup, because I know a lot of people are going to ask me about that, like what color scheme I'm using, what font I'm using. If that's not relevant to you, if you don't care, that's totally fine. Just skip ahead to the next part and start from there. What we're going to go over now is my setup. So I have a shortcut. It is LeaderVR. My leader is alias to space, but it is the backward slash. I have the leader set up to backward slash, and then I have an alias for the leader as space. So when you see me type space something, that means leader. If I'm inside Vim, if I'm in the terminal, space is not mapped out. It's not aliased in that case. Um, I'm currently recording with my background set to dark, and there are a few settings here that I want to go over, specifically the color scheme. Ignore all the commented out stuff. Those are things that I actually am not using anymore, and actually I should probably just take them out. So again, I have the set background dark here, and I'm using the one color scheme. It is based off the Atom 1 default color scheme that ships with Atom editor. I really like this color scheme. The colors are kind of nice and bright, but not too bright. I did add a few modifications to it. First of all, I have settings to allow italics. And then there are a few things that were missing, and they may have been implemented at this point. But I didn't want to wait around for PR to get merged, so I basically just overwrote a few like Elixir specific things, and then the Vim to do. So I have specific highlight for that. The line on the right shows you where kind of like my color column is, and the way I do that to have kind of like a block instead of just a single line, and have all of this part uh, in a different color, is by using this setting. The font that I'm using, I'm currently in iTerm. For Terminal Emulator, I use both iTerm and Kitty, spelled Kitty. Kitty is a little bit faster using OpenGL, but for this demo, I'll be using iTerm since a lot of people know it. Both of those, I actually use Monofura as my font. So you notice here, I think it's, yeah, right here. Or actually, it's just Fura code, which is a patched version of Fira code. It's an open source font that supports ligatures, and I have used ligatures turned on, which may turn things into, for example, if I had something here like equal and angle bracket that turns into an arrow, stuff like that, or equal turns into just like 2 continuous lines, and then if I add another equal, it turns into 3 lines. That's a cool little feature of ligatures. So just getting that out of the way in case any of you are wondering what I'm using and want to emulate some of that superficial setup. I want to show you the terminal in NeoVim, which is really one of my favorite features. It's one of the reasons that I switched to NeoVim. So there are a few ways to start a terminal. The one you just saw me do, just typing terminal, would do the trick. There is, you have the ability to do a split, and then type term, : / and then type any program. So for example, I'm going to put HTOP on my split, and that just opens the program in a modal mode. So if I were to exit that program, or I need to be in insert mode and Control C, the process exited, and if I press enter, that split goes away. So again, vsplit, term : / top, very similar thing. You'll notice that I am in normal mode inside of the terminal by default when I enter it. And there are settings that you can change to have it not that way, to have it be set to insert mode right away, which is how you can send commands. Because if I send Control C right now, this is not going to send Control C to the terminal program running. It's actually going to send it to NeoVim. So if I want to actually send it, I have to be in insert mode. So usually what I do is I do Shift A, and then I'll be sending Control C, whatever. I do like it this way because I get to copy stuff in visual mode. I am actually using a plugin called NeoTerm, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that later on in the screencast. Say that I have, I'm going to open the package.json here. Let's say that I'm inside of the right terminal. So normally you know, to switch between the panes, you can just do Control W L to go to the right, Control W H to go to the left. You'll start out here in visual mode, and you can turn on like line selection, select text. It's very helpful because sometimes you need the results from commands that you run, like from tests and so on. But when you go into insert mode, you might be wondering, how do I go So now if you type Control W age, like how do I go back? Right? This is not really working. So I have shortcuts that I've set up in my VimRC. I'm going to show you those. I have a section here specifically for NeoVim. And these shortcuts are what I use. So basically Control H, Control J, Control K, and Control L, those will all allow you to move around splits continuously. You'll notice that there is something that might be new to you, TNoVim. That is, T stands for the terminal. And then that will basically allow you to navigate. So if I do just Control L, we'll go to the right, Control H, we'll go to the left. If I had another split here, this, by the way, this is FCF with BAT on the preview. I'm going to open the flow config. So now Control K, Control J, and it's pretty seamless. It's really nice. If you're coming from TeamOx, I'm going to show you some tools for that as well to make the transition a little easier. How do you exit the insert mode in the terminal? That's something that's not very clear. And by default, it is Control / Control N. And if you forget that, I suggest you go to, before you open the terminal for the first time, just go to the terminal help. And I'm going to close all the other splits. And over here, you'll notice that they mentioned that right away. So Control / followed by Control N will actually put you back into normal mode inside of the terminal. And they do also have a suggestion here for how to set up the seamless navigation. They use Alt. I prefer to use Control. It's a little more ergonomic for me. It's kind of like where my pinky goes naturally, so that's why I chose that. And you'll have to set it up probably also for insert mode and normal mode. I have that set up, I believe, through a plugin, so I don't have to worry about it. But that's why I only had to set up the TNoVim mappings. Okay, so that's how I navigate around. And now you know how to exit. And for me, I actually have a few shortcuts for exiting. So I use leader escape. In my case, it's / followed by escape. So I find that a little bit less RSI inducing. What it does is it sends Control / Control N followed by escape and enter. And also I use Control O. I don't use that one as much. This is the main one for me to basically, once I'm in the terminal, let's say I ran ls and I want to copy some of this stuff, I'll type leader escape, and then I can start selecting that, press Y, and then I can just paste it right here. So that's very useful. All right. Other than that, a few other ways to exit the terminal. Right now, you'll notice that I do colon Q, and that closes the split, but the terminal remains open in my buffer. So if I do Control B, you'll notice I actually have a couple terminals. I use a plugin called NeoTerm, as I mentioned, and I'm going to show you how that is set up. First of all, let me open up NeoTerm. All right, so this is the NeoTerm GitHub. It gives you a bunch of commands like tclear to clear all the scroll back history. Like you can manage multiple buffers, like have a colon T1 and then call something on one buffer and then call like ls on the other buffer. So stuff like that. It supports REPL, and it's got all kinds of cool settings. But the one that is key for me that I use like every day, all the time, is toggle. So let's go to my setup here, and inside my NeoVim fold, I've got this. So you'll notice that I have a few mappings here. Those I don't use as often, like the Shift O, but sometimes I do want a terminal at the leader, big O. Oopsie. I just changed that one recently. This is the one I use all the time. So colon vertical bot right, T toggle. I press enter, and then I switch directly to that pane. So when I do leader space, or in my case, backward slash and space, it opens up a split and puts it on the right. What you'll notice is if I have a few things open, let's say I have ESLint open in a split, and I also have the package JSON open in a vertical split as well. This thing remains in its own split that's kind of flush to the side, and that's very helpful. So normally, if you just set this, these are called mods. If you want to learn more about mods, you need to go to age mods. Okay, so there are a few of those mods, and I really don't know all of them, but I learned the ones that I needed. So if you use a combination of vertical and bot right, you'll notice that if I go here, age bot right, it says when the split is vertical, the window appears at the far right and occupies the full height of the Vim window. And that's all I was looking for. So this is an example of how to do that with the top left. So now I have a lot of splits here, and really, if I didn't put this bot right, I just put vertical, what would happen is it would split the current buffer with, or the current split with my terminal, and then everything kind of gets jacked up. But because I use the vertical bot right, it will actually go ahead and open it on the far right and occupy the whole height of the window. So that's super helpful for me. Another thing that this can do, so let's say I have my buffer kind of full. I can get back into normal mode, and I'm going to type T clear, bang, and that just clears the whole buffer for me. So you can set up your own mapping for those type of things. I don't use it a whole lot. For me, just the toggle is just a magic feature that I just had to have. So that's what NeoTerm is for. It's definitely not necessary, but it makes the workflow a little bit easier. You'll notice here that the colors that I'm using, I don't think those are included in the basic colors for a terminal. So if I go here, or true color, I have this set up with set term GUI colors, and that enables true color, which Vim 1 color scheme supports. I mentioned in the talk the mouse support, which is really, really good actually in NeoVim. if I open a split here with the terminal and I want to resize it, I can just grab it. And of course I can do it with like the keyboard directly, but if I want to just be visual about it, I can just drag it and everything is super smooth. The way that's set up is with set mouse equals A. And that also enables me to scroll inside of a buffer. So now I'm using my mouse to scroll. And that's super helpful. And select text without the number, the line number. So if I want to just select all the text here, I can just click and drag, and you'll notice only the text excuse me, that I actually need is what's selected. So that's a huge improvement. It definitely allows you to compete with solutions like TeamOx. And all you have to do is just set mouse equals A. When I try to rename something, I have a shortcut. It is LeaderK. This basically allows me to replace a word under the cursor. So let's say I have and no remap, and I want to change all the occurrences of that. So what I can do to have a more visual feedback for what I'm doing is I'll do LeaderK, and that basically grabs the word under the cursor and puts it directly inside of a substitute command, and then puts me right in to edit what I'm going to change it to. Now, this is a NeoVim feature only. I don't know that it exists in legacy Vim. I'm going to try and change that to vno remap. Let's see what that looks like. So you'll notice that as I type, it actually changes all the occurrences that are in view and gives you kind of like a preview of what it would look like. Now, it didn't really change it just yet. It just shows you a preview. So even if I press enter, I did add a GC at the end to do it globally and then confirm with me with each replacement. So when I do enter, then it goes and it checks, do you want to replace this one? And I'm going to say yes. Do you want to replace that one? And I say no. Hopefully you get the point. So that is set up via a NeoVim specific command or setting called increment. Now this supports a few options here. The one that I'm using is no split. If you use it in split mode, what will happen is if the search term that you're looking for actually exists in a part of the buffer that you are not seeing right now, it will open up a temporary split just to show you, for example, the middle of the file. I think I can probably demonstrate what that looks like. So set inc I think split is the value I'm looking for, but I guess we'll see. So let's say I want to replace T no remap, LeaderK, no remap. So you'll notice that it opened like some sort of a split. It just shows you all the different occurrences and their line number on the left. And in addition to showing you a preview, a live preview. So it's a pretty neat feature. I like using no split for my purposes, but it really is up to you what you like. Also, I want to cover the cursors. So you'll notice that when I'm in insert mode, this behaves kind of like a modern editor in the sense that it changes my cursor to a pipe. And the way that's done is via this command. Now, you don't have to memorize all that. It's actually all in the NeoVim help file. So if you go to help GUI cursor. It'll be right here, and I do recommend that you copy that from here and not from me, because I don't know if mine, it appears the same, but it could be out of date at this point. I do recommend opening help GUI cursor, and that gives you that. And also, if you're like in replace mode, for example, that puts like a underline cursor that as you type basically changes. Let's do Shift R. Hello. Right. So I do really like cursor shapes. They really are how I learned to kind of have a brain to screen connection and kind of understand what mode I'm in. So that's what I recommend doing for the GUI cursor. So another really cool tool that I have here is NVR. So I mentioned that before. That's what allows me to do something like colon QA. By the way the command is highlighted, for example, if I make up a command that doesn't exist, it'll color it red. That is, if you're wondering about that. And here's another cool thing that I'm going to do now. I'm going to use E. And I'm using zplug to manage all of my ZSH plugins. And then when I type E here, they'll open it on the left side split. The syntax highlighting that I mentioned is coming from this plugin right here. So it's a cool way to kind of edit stuff or like open stuff on the left from the terminal without having the terminal take over. You don't want to nest Vim sessions. I mean, you can, and it actually works. So if I do, Vim, now I have a Vim session inside a terminal of Vim. I don't really like that, but it works. To avoid it, I have the E shortcut, and I'll show you how that's set up. So E in this case is alias to NVR minus L. Let me open up NVR. It's actually called NeoVim Remote. So NeoVim Remote by Marco Hinz is a command line utility that you install from pip, and it uses NeoVim's sockets to communicate with the active instance of NeoVim. How does it work? Like what happens if you have multiple Vim instances? So if I echo dollar nvim listen address, so it knows how to communicate with the currently open instance and not with another one that you might have. So let's say I have another Vim instance open here. So let's open up my /rc. It will open it on here, but you'll notice that over here it didn't get open. So that's a pretty cool feature. I'm going to try and add a few things. Okay, I'm good to go. So now I have some stashed changes, and I'm going to create a Git commit. So I have an alias to Git commit -v, which is GC. So I'm just going to type GC. And you'll notice what happened here is another terminal split. This is a split. Okay, so I can navigate around. It's another terminal split. Got to open, and it contains my commit message, syntax highlighted through some other plugin that I have. And basically, I can just start typing my message here. and type the comment. And when I close this, when I do WQ, what will happen is this buffer will commit the message. And this is some other thing I have that runs a post commit check to tell me, hey, like all commit messages supposed to start with capital letter. Whatever, I'm gonna force commit and ignore that for now. So now when I look at my Git log, that's there. So it closed the buffer, and it's no longer in my buffer list, and it switched back to the previous terminal without changing anything, except for making the commit. So now I'm gonna take the head off because I don't really mean to have that commit in there. And I'm gonna show you how that's done. So in order to have a split with Git editor, I defined an environment variable specifically for inside the Vim session. So I'm using let $. Whenever you do that, that basically sets up an environment variable that's only available in this terminal. So if I do echo $git editor, you'll notice that it is equal to what's on the left here. And if I open another item split and I do the same thing, it's NeoVim. So that's a really cool trick for having different settings for when you're inside of NeoVim in your terminal. And I do that with a bunch of different things here. My default editor is NVR-L, which just opens that on the left. So I wonder if that's also the case here. Yeah, so you'll notice that the alias E here by default is NeoVim, and over here it's NVR-L. So let's look at my my aliases. So when I do alias E, that's just expanding $editor or the editor environment variable, and V does visual, and I believe they are kind of similar. Actually, this one will act the same as the Git editor. And then editor will just open the thing on the left pane. And how it decides which one, I don't remember exactly. I think you can look at some of the options here. So -L does change to the previous window via win command P. So it'll change to the previous one you were on, and then it'll open the thing in there. The Git editor, what that does, it uses the -cc, which executes a command before every other option. So it will run the split command inside of Vim. It will do a remote wait, which will make it wait until I'm done editing. And then when it's done, it's going to call locally buff hidden equals delete. So when I close that buffer, it will basically delete it. So this only does it on that specific buffer, so it doesn't stay around. And if you don't do that, you will have a bunch of old Git commits stuck in your Vim buffers, and when you navigate them, especially if you use something like this or Vim Buffer Explorer, then you'll have a bunch of stuff there. So that's a pretty neat trick that I came up with. And I think I actually may have found it online on the issues. So, okay. So that covers Git configuration and some of those NVR tricks that I use. And there's a few more things you can do with NVR. I think it's really worth exploring. You can open a bunch of different files together. You can really send almost any command you want because it supports expressions, Vim script expressions, and like normal mode. You can do something like this. So let's try that out. So here's another cool trick. I just copied something here, and I'll show you how that highlight happened. But I just copied something, and I want to paste it directly in the terminal. So I'm in normal mode. If I just press P in the terminal, you'll notice that it's basically pasted it, and it's ready to go. So let's do that. So when I did that, it just sends it to the to this current buffer, which is the terminal. So that's not very helpful for me. So what if I do the same thing and I do -L? Let's see that. So that switched to the left, or like the previous one, and then typed IABC, followed by return and escape. So it put me back in normal mode. And then you'll notice here, kind of messed up everything for me. I'm going to undo that. But it's another cool thing you can do, and you can really script the hell out of NeoVim if you wanted to. Let's talk about TeamOx a little bit. So if you are coming from TeamOx, you may be used to using some sort of like a chord, or not really a chord, but it's like a for us, I work at HashRocket, and we use TeamOx, and we have Control Z as our prefix keyboard shortcut. So in order to switch between panes, what I do at work is like Control Z H, Control Z L. Granted, Control Z is probably not the best thing they could have chose, but it's pretty ergonomic. Definitely better than the default, which I think is Control B, which I really don't like. But you can have the same thing here, and the way that is set up is via a plugin called NVMux. So let's look at my plugin. So first of all, I check the existence of $TeamOx environment variable, and if that doesn't exist, then I load that in because I don't want to have a conflict. And I do have a really cool thing here. If I press GX, it will actually open it in GitHub. So this is NVMux, and it's very helpful when you're just like trying to start out with NeoVim, and your muscle memories is all locked on the thing, so on a very specific set of shortcuts. So that will help alleviate that. Let me show you how I set that up. So the one thing that's weird about that is this is using Lua. Like I mentioned in my talk, the first part, you can really write a Vim plugin in almost any language, and Lua is one of them. NeoVim really put a lot of effort to support Lua, I personally don't use Lua, and I don't really care for it a whole lot. I know some people swear by it. That's fine. What you'll notice here is that I have some sort of a here doc. It's really like just a block of Lua code. And what's weird here is that NeoVim, at least the Vim script highlight uh, support, doesn't know how to take care of that. So it just shows it as just text. And that used to break some things for me before, but now it seems to have gotten better. I have it set up to this prefix. There's a few things here to remember. Remember the modes that I showed before, bot right, vertical, and so on. Uh, I don't use a whole lot of those anymore because I don't use them in TeamOx, so there's not a whole lot of points for that. But I can just do Control Z V, which will open a split and stuff like that. Not very useful, but for me, just Control Z. I don't want it to basically suspend NeoVim when I do that type of muscle memory action. So I kept that in, and hopefully that's helpful for you if you're coming from Vim plus TeamOx. So we mentioned the terminal, and one of the things that uh, people do with terminals inside of their editor is run tests. So a plugin that I use is VimTest. So VimTest, let me open the GitHub for that, or test.vim. Apparently it's different from the repo name. It's very useful. It supports a lot of languages, and if I find the test here, I think this should pass. So I'm gonna use a shortcut, and if you want to see those, I have those right here. The first thing I tell it is that I wanted to use the near-term strategy. Now you don't have to. If you're not using near-term, let's say you want to have it on an I-term split, like that one, that's possible too. VimTest or test.vim is very flexible, and it supports a bunch of different strategies. Since I use near-term, that's what I put in there. I set up a few shortcuts that might be familiar to you if you've used something like that before. So Shift T, Leader Shift T, runs the nearest test to where the cursor is. Leader Small T runs the whole file. And then Leader A runs the entire test suite. I don't use that one a whole lot. Leader L runs the last test. Basically reruns it. I don't really use that one either. Usually what I'll do is I'll do Control L to switch to the terminal on the right, and then Control P to bring up the previous command and press enter. So it's a little bit longer. This probably could be useful, but for me, these two are the main ones that I use. So let's see it in action. So switching back into here, I'm gonna run Leader Shift T just to run this specific test. And you notice nothing happened. That's because this thing was basically the terminal was open, but the pane was hidden. And so I opened it with my shortcut. And right now it's not compiling. Well, it is compiling, but it's complaining that Postgres is closed. So I'm gonna run Postgres here, and I do have that database set up already, so hopefully that should do the trick. Right, and that test passes. So Leader Shift T, as you see, puts the command on the right, and it knows exactly how to run it because it supports Elixir. and it supports XUnit, which is what I'm using. It's smart enough to recognize and know what I'm using, which is really cool. How it does that, if you want to know, just read the code. It supports VimTest, which I use as well, and RSpec, which I use at work. And these are all the different strategies that it supports. So it even has support for Vim 8, as well as T-Slime, which is what I use at work, Neoterm, iTerm 2, and the built-in terminal app. I don't see support for Kitty here, but whatever. I don't really like to have GUI splits, just because I like to have it easy to move back and forth, and I feel like it's more seamless when I just use the same shortcut. So that's that. If I want to run the whole file, just LeaderT, and then it just runs it without the line number at the end. And as you see, everything passes. And that's test.vim. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Let's talk about language servers. Language servers are a form of a protocol that you use between a client of some sort, and in this case, the client is a code editor, and a language, a programming language. So it provides the editor with intelligence about the language, and it allows you to have stuff like autocomplete, rename something across multiple files or an entire project. And they usually work best in compiled or statically typed languages, though that's not to say that it won't be available for languages that are dynamic. If you go to this website, langserver.org, you'll find a lot of tools and sort of lists of which languages have support and what they support. Here are some examples of some of the features of a language server. Code completion, hover. So in more mouse-driven editors like Visual Studio Code, you can actually hover over a piece of text, and it will tell you some information about it. Jump to definition, workspace, symbols, finding references. So if you have a symbol and you want to see all the places it's being used, that's how you do that. I can give you some diagnostics and additional capabilities. Some language servers actually have debugger support. So how is that relevant to Vim? So Vim actually has something called the language server client, and here's an example of it in action. So as you can see here, there's a couple functions, and here they're trying to rename greet to hello, and the language server does the work, and they're doing it on a Rust example, probably using RLS, which is the Rust language server. I'm going to show you how I'm using language client NeoVim, which is this project right here. It also, despite the name, has support for Vim. That kind of came on later. And you'll notice that with actually a lot of packages nowadays, they basically start out with just NeoVim because it has better interfaces and job control. And then some people who use legacy Vim just come in and add support for Vim and via pull requests. Sometimes that's done via compatibility layers because the interfaces are different, or at least have been different last time I looked at it. Okay, so let's take a look at an Elixir project using Elixir LS, which is one of the Elixir language servers. I'm gonna go into counts test, and over here I'm gonna start typing user, and as you can see, I just have to type a U, and right away I see a bunch of modules starting with U. So I'm going to pick user, and then I'm going to press N dot. And then I'm going to pick registration change set. You'll notice that it shows me a placeholder for the parameters for the function. And I can basically just press, in my case, I press the left arrow key in order to go back, and it starts expanding them. I can type whatever I want here. And then when I press tab, it goes to the next one. So it's pretty cool. And there's actually an issue with the expansion of parameters that you just saw. That is something that is not easily supported. I found a solution. So the NeoVim language client will basically give you those strings like that. So dollar curly 1 colon something or other, but that it's not passing it through directly to a snippet manager. So I found some piece of code that somebody put in the issue here. Thank you, Tyler, for putting this in here. So I just copied it directly, basically, and put it in my VimRC. This does require the Ultisnips plugin. So if you don't have that, that probably will not work. And it's relying on the fact that you have some sort of completion manager. I use Diopleat, which supports the NeoVim client. Another thing I want to show is jump to definition. So I have a contextual menu of sorts using FZF. For me, it is leader semicolon. And then I can just type definition. It takes the word that was under the cursor, and I was on user. So it'll basically jump to user, and notice that it knows what user means in this context. I have subs.account.user, and I basically jumped directly to it because it's aliased in here. There are a few other things you can do in the contextual menu. You can find references. And here I found all the references to user, and I can basically jump to one of them. Not everything here will work. I'll give you an example of something that doesn't work. Renaming doesn't work specifically in Elixir, but your mileage may vary. It depends on what language you're using, and if you have a good implementation of the language server protocol. I should say complete instead of good. So let me try and rename and see what happens in that case. So it lets you rename it to whatever you want. And I'm going to just call it registration change. And it just says invalid request. So that's language server. Let's see how it's set up. So this is the language client NeoVim settings. For Rust, I'm using RLS, which comes from the Rust nursery. For JavaScript, I'm using the TypeScript. Standard IO. Haskell, I'm using HIE --LSP. For Elixir, I'm basically giving it the path to the .sh file that is generated in the release for Elixir LS. And then for Ruby, I'm using SolarGraph. This is how you define the mapping for the contextual menu. And if you don't want to use the snippets, you can disable them by turning on this flag. All right, last but not least, I want to show you this. So when I select a few lines, press Y, you'll notice that it highlighted for a few seconds or a second the thing that I just copied and that gives you a better visual indication of what you're about to paste somewhere else. So, um, and that's more useful, especially like if you just visually selecting a few lines, pressing Y, maybe it's not the most useful thing. But let's say I want to do YY to just copy the whole line. So now I see that I just copied what I wanted. Let's say I do like Y/closing. So now I see exactly what I copied. Or like let's say I want to copy what's inside the brackets here. YI open bracket, and then so just it highlighted what was just copied to the buffer, to the register. So the way that worked is Vim highlighted yank. Let's jump over to that. Make the yanked region apparent. Well, I guess Vim 8 added support for that. Not too up to date on what legacy Vim is doing these days, but if you didn't have that, then you had to do some hack to get it to work. You can change the duration, how long you want it to highlight. Basically, just bring the thing in. You can change the color if you wanted to, and then just select something, press Y, and it just copies it and highlights what you copied. So another cool visual cue um, to use. I think other than that, there's a few other plugins, but I wouldn't say they're NeoVim specific, so I'm not going to show them today. Hopefully this was useful for you, and all of my dot files would be online at the end of this screencast. I'll post them. So feel free to look around, open an issue on my dot files. If you have a question, I'll be happy to answer it. Don't try to reach me on YouTube because I don't hang out on YouTube. I don't really read the comments on YouTube. If you have questions, just either find me on Twitter and send me a message, or try to open an issue in my dot files. Those are two ways to reach me. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.